Microsoft SQL Server is one of the most developer-friendly databases to install and to learn. If you are a beginner to relational databases, Microsoft SQL Server should be your first choice to hone your SQL skills. Apart from excellent documentation and various help forums, SQL Server is also very intuitive to use. This means you can learn quite a lot on your own. Hi, I'm Bindu Kumar from Data Academy. In this video, we are going to install SQL Server database on a Windows operating system. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to install SQL Server 2014 on Windows. So a couple of things about the environment. I'm using Windows Server 2012 as the operating system. It is a 64-bit version of Windows. And we will install SQL Server 2014 Express Edition on this. So the first step is to download the setup files for SQL Server. To do that, I'll open Google Chrome and search for SQL Server 2014 Express. And I'll click on this very first link. You will also find this link in the description of this video. Now the first thing you'll have to do is you'll have to select a language. I'll keep it at what is the default selection, which is English. Click on download. Now this presents a bunch of files. We really don't need all these files. I'll go with this particular version, which is Express Edition with Advanced Services 64-bit, and it's 1.1 GB. So this really is the installation that has everything in it, right? All the other setup files either have one of the features being left out. For example, if you go with one of the first set of files, you will only find the database service, but none of the other advanced services. So for this example, let's go with the advanced services. And you can see the selection is 1.1 GB in size. So go ahead and click on next. Now the file should begin downloading any moment now. Okay, there you go. But I'm going to cancel this because I've already downloaded the file. I really don't want to make a video where you see me downloading the file for the next 30 minutes. All right. So let me head over to the downloads folder, and here it is. I'm going to double click this file. So I need to choose a directory for extracting the files. I'll just click on OK. And it's done. The setup should start on its own any moment now. Okay, there you go. So it's here. Now I'll select, you can notice that the installation tab is selected on the left panel, and on the right side, let's click on the first option, which is New SQL Server Standalone Installation. We will need to accept the license terms. The second option, which is to turn on the customer experience improvement program, is an optional. So I'll leave that unchecked. Click on next. Now it'll do a set of checks to ensure all the prerequisites are met before the installation can begin. It'll check things like the .NET Framework that's installed. It's going to check for, let's say, the firewall rules that have been applied and bunch of stuff. Okay, so you see it skipped that screen, which means everything was fine. But you can still go back to that screen and see what were the results. So for that, I'll click on back, and here you can see this was the result. So majority have passed. There are three warnings, something to do with the Windows firewall, the .NET application security, and computer domain controller. But warnings can be, sort of skipped. We can take care of this later. So let's just click on next. Now here is where you need to select all the features that you think are needed for here. Now, if this is strictly for, just playing around with SQL Server, getting familiar with it, and, creating your own database and tables and running some sample queries, you really don't need advanced services such as the SQL Server replication. You wouldn't need the reporting services, but I would say let's keep the reporting services, okay? And now for the shared features, we would need all of these. Okay, so I think we are good to go with this. All I did was uncheck the SQL Server replication. Click on next. Okay, so now it says the Microsoft .NET Framework failed. Okay, let's install that straight away. So I'll Google for Microsoft .NET Framework 3.5 Service Pack 1. Again, I'll click on the first link. You'll also find this link in the description. So you see I've started the installation of the .NET Framework. Okay, so since this is a Windows server, I cannot install .NET Framework this way. I'll have to do it through the service manager or the server manager actually. Once here, click on local server. Okay, so I'm back to the dashboard, and from here I'll select add rules and features. Click on next. Keep the first option, which is role-based or feature-based installation. Again, go with the default option, just click on next. Now here I'll have to select the .NET Framework. No, actually, I believe the .NET Framework would be in the next screen, which is features and not roles. And there you go. So we have the .NET Framework here. So I'm going to select this. And I'm just going to check if there's anything else that I would need. Okay, so seems like this is all I needed for now. So let's just click on next. I'll say install. All right. So it took a while, but finally the .NET Framework 3.5 is installed. So we'll close this and head back to SQL Server. Now here I'll click on back, or let's try rerun. Perfect. So it passed that phase and now it's on to the next stage. Now here is an important thing. By default, it has selected the named instance. The named instance is nothing but what is the name that you are giving to your SQL Server, right? So you can pretty much edit this and give any name that you want. Now you can have multiple versions of SQL Server running on the same computer, which would mean every instance would need a different name. Now, if you were to select the default instance, right, there wouldn't be any name associated with it. Meaning, if any computer tries to connect to this server, it will connect to this particular instance by default. So the default instance does not have a name associated. It is enough to provide the server name, right? So to avoid any confusion, for now we will go with default instance. Click on next. Okay, so in the service accounts, we will leave all these at default. However, you can choose the startup type uh, to be manual. So the difference is if you set it to automatic, every time your computer starts, the SQL Server database would start as well. The service would start as well, right? Sometimes if you have very less resources on your computer, you really don't want to do that. Usually I choose to keep it as manual so that I can turn it on whenever I need to access SQL Server, right? But again, for this example, we'll keep it as automatic. Just click on next. A very important step here. Here we will specify how do you authenticate to SQL Server. What credentials do you use? So you'll see by default it has selected Windows authentication mode, which means the current user, whoever is doing this installation, that current user will automatically be added as a server administrator, right? But what if you want to connect to this from a different computer using a different username, right? So for that we will need a mixed mode authentication. So mixed mode meaning it will use Windows authentication as well as SQL Server authentication. Consider this as a SQL Server's own authentication method, and the username for the system administrator in the SQL Server is SA. It's just two characters, SA. So I'll need to type in a password here. So whatever password you type here, just make sure you remember that. I'll need to enter it twice. So I'll click on next. Now since we chose reporting services, These are options to configure it, either install and configure or just install only. We'll do a install and configure. Okay, so now the installation has begun. All this while we were just setting the different parameters and configurations that we needed. Now it's using all that information to actually do the installation. Now this may take a couple of minutes. Okay, so the installation finally completed after running close to, I believe, 20 to 25 minutes. It really depends on the amount of memory and CPU that you have. So now you can see the status here. It shows all succeeded, so which is good. So let's click on close. And you'll notice the wizard that we initially launched is still open. So we can close this as well. I believe there's still some background process that are running. So let me open Task Manager just to be sure. I'll sort by name and see if there's anything related to SQL Server installation. Okay, so I don't see anything running at the moment. Let me go and look for SQL Server 2014. So here, from Start Programs, you'll see a bunch of folders that have been created, namely the SQL Server 2008 and 2014. You can ignore the 2008. Those are just some shared components that have been installed. So let's head over to SQL Server 2014 and you'll see the last one, SQL Server 2014 Management Studio. This is the client tool or the GUI through which you can connect to SQL Server. So go ahead and click on that. The first time you run it, it does this process. It says loading user settings. This is just for the first time. Every subsequent time that we open it should be quite fast. Okay, so now it's giving an option to connect to a server, right? So make sure the database or the server type is database engine. The server name is your machine, right? So the machine on which I installed this is called the Comanche server. So that's what it is. You can replace this with either local host or the local IP address, which is 127.0.0.1. But I'll leave this as default. The authentication here you will notice is Windows. Click on connect. So on the left side in the Object Explorer, if you are able to see the server name and if you expand the database, you should be able to see the report server. So this shows that the installation has been successful. Still, let's do some more checks. So one thing I want to check is if the SQL Server authentication is working. So to do that, let's disconnect from this. So you see there's an option right here. It says disconnect. And click on the other button to connect. From the authentication drop down, I'll select SQL Server Authentication. Now the login is available. Remember the login name is SA and the password. I hope you have made a note of it. I'll check this box, remember password, click on connect. Excellent. So now I'm able to connect to SQL Server using two methods, either through Windows authentication or through SQL Server authentication. Now let's go ahead, create a database and see if we are able to create some tables and query the data from it. So to do that, I'll say new database. I'll give it a name of test DB. The rest, everything else is default. Click on OK. Now within testDB, I'll expand the tables. There are no tables here. Right click, click on a table. So I'll create two columns. One will be the employee ID, which will be an int, and next will be an employee name, which will be a varchar of 50. Now just click on Save Table 1 and it will ask for a name. We'll call it employees. Okay, so although you have created this table, you will not notice that in this list unless you refresh. So let's hit refresh and the table is visible now. Now let's insert a record into this. Right click on the table, select edit top 200 rows. We'll enter 1 for the employee ID and John for the employee name. Type 2 for the employee ID and Jane for the employee name. So now clicking anywhere outside of the cell should commit this record. We will close this window. Head over to another button. It's called New Query. So let's type that. Now ensure that you are pointing to the test database and nothing else, right? So the test database is selected from this drop down here. Here I'll type select star from employees. So you'll notice that the moment I start typing in, it's listing the available tables that start with the same name. Now either hit F5 on the keyboard or click on execute. Bingo. So now we are able to see the two records that we entered into this table. So if you're able to do this, it means that SQL Server is successfully installed, the database service is up and running, and you have the appropriate set of permissions to be able to create tables and add or manipulate data into this.